My name's Natalie Stetson. I'm the director of the Erie Canal Museum, and this is I think our third digital lunchtime lecture. Um, Today's lecture is called The Big Ditches, Big Problems at Niagara. Before I introduce our speaker, I have a couple of announcements to make. First of all, the museum is open. We are open Monday through Saturdays from 10 to 3. For regular visitation, we allow one party of up to 10 to enter every 15 minutes. We ask that you make a reservation on our website before you come. It's easy to find, eriecanalmuseum.org/tickets. There's also links right from our homepage. If you happen to end up on our homepage, I can't remember that it's /tickets, you can get the reservation page right there. Our hours, Monday through Saturday from 10 to 3, will be our hours for about a month longer, and then the 35th Annual Gingerbread Gallery will open and things will change a little bit then. And we will share information about how that's going to work with you in the near future. We do have some exciting events coming up this week. On Friday, we still have time slots available for Escape on the Erie. During this event, your team will take on the identity of a German immigrant in Syracuse during the heyday of the Erie Canal. While exploring the museum's exhibits, you're challenged to solve puzzles and unlock your team's breakout box. So it's kind of an escape room-like event. It's very fun. We're using all safety precautions to make sure it is safe for you and your team. Teams are allowed to be of up to 6, and everybody will keep distant and be required to wear masks in the museum during this event. But there is still time available. And then on Saturday, we have our final Pathway of Resistance walking tour of the year. This guided walking tour of Syracuse examines the African-American experience on and along the banks of the Erie Canal from the waterway's beginnings to contemporary times. There are still a few spots left. About half of the times we've offered this tour, it has sold out. This one is not sold out yet, but you could be the reason it sells out. If you go to our website, eriecanalmuseum.org/events, you can find more information about both of those events and sign up to join us. I mentioned our 35th Annual Gingerbread Gallery, which will be opening on November 20th. So that's just a month from today. Is that real? Wow. Time flies. If you're interested in participating in the Gingerbread Gallery by building a beautiful gingerbread creation, you can register on our website, eriecanalmuseum.org/gingerbread. Boy, our website is chock full of information. And lastly, if you're watching us on Facebook Live, but you would be interested in joining us on Zoom for a slightly more reliable connection and the ability to join us for the Q&A at the end of the program, it's not too late to go to our website and donate $5. You'll then be emailed a link that you can join us right here on Zoom. I will link to where you can donate in the comments section on Facebook. So without further ado, it is now my distinct pleasure to introduce our speaker. Ray Wigle is the manager of the Erie Canal Discovery Center in Lockport, New York. Ray is a graduate of the State University of New York at Buffalo. He's worked at the Discovery Center, Old Fort Niagara, and other nonprofit history organizations in Western New York. Today, he's going to be discussing the daunting challenges that canal builders faced in Niagara County when building the original Erie Canal. I know that's why you're all here today, so it is my pleasure now to hand the screen over and welcome Ray Wigle. Thanks for being here, Ray.
Well, thank you very much. And I trust that if somebody can't hear me, either Natalie or Derek will let me know. But we thought we would focus on the main topic that we have at the Erie Canal Discovery Center in Lockport, which is, of course, what they did at what became Lockport. So we will go to a program that we call The Big Ditches, Big Problem in Niagara. Now, normally when I do a Facebook program, PowerPoint program, I really don't like to read captions to people. So for this program, there aren't any printed captions. You'll just have to listen to me. But our next screen is actually an excerpt from a journal written by Anne Royal, who was one of the very first, if not the first, women journalists in the new United States. She traveled on the Erie Canal in 1828, starting at Lake Erie at Buffalo, and traveled, I think she went all the way east, but she certainly went through what had become Lockport. So here's an excerpt, which I'm going to read because I really think it needs some verbal or vocal emphasis. It staggers belief and nothing but reality the huge machines yet standing on the margin of the canal with which the stone was removed out of it, the mountains of stone heaped up on each side, and the certainty that you are actually sailing through a mountain could wring the truth from us that this stupendous work was performed by man. At the end of this excavation is Lockport, which takes its name from 5 double locks combined together, each 12 feet and a quarter rise. And we'll see what she was talking about. I'm not going to go through the whole history of the Erie Canal for this audience, but just a very quick recap. After the American Revolution, the new United States initially was mostly along the eastern seaboard, the former colonies. These were the big population centers. But it was very clear immediately, and became even more clear as time went on, that people were going to be moving out and settling in what they called the West. And indeed, this began to happen. Ideally, this was going to require huge amounts of stuff to be moved around back and forth. Initially, almost everything would have to be moved into the West, and then eventually things would have to go back and forth between the parts of the country, huge quantities of stuff. And at that point in time, around the beginning of the 19th century in North America, to move large loads of anything over any kind of distance, you really did it by water. And of course, ideally out here in the West is a huge network of waterways that would be really wonderful to exploit. And indeed, people began to exploit them. But there was a slight problem in getting a waterway from the east to the west, or from the west to the east. That problem being, as we all know, the Appalachian Mountains. Getting a waterway, or for that matter, a roadway, a good road across the mountains was incredibly difficult. There was a solution, and this was it. This is what New York State did. Again, we're not going to get into the whole history, but it was realized very early in the 19th century that New York, being a seaport, was connected to the inland part of the state by this wonderful shipping route known as the Hudson River. And if they could get a waterway from the Hudson through the Mohawk Valley, the Mohawk River not being really navigable at that point, across New York State and into Lake Erie, let's see if I can back up here, now they would have access from Lake Erie not only to the upper Great Lakes region, but they could build canals down into the Ohio and get into the Mississippi and all the water systems out here. So this really was the solution to connecting the eastern and western United States. As you know, they started construction at Rome in 1817 and built outward in both directions. Right from the beginning, the designers and builders realized that they had an awful lot to learn about building canals, and they also recognized that they were going to be dealing with a huge number of problems, many of which had never really been effectively overcome in other canals in other parts of the world. One of the very biggest problems, fortunately for them, at the end of the project was down at the western end. The Niagara Escarpment. If we look up on the top here, the original sort of cross-section of the canal, or the, whatever you want to call it, elevation, you can see they brought the canal across the state. Now, here at the western end, south of Lake Ontario, is the beginning of a high cliff, a very steep ridge that just starts west of Rochester and heads on to the west. In fact, it goes from Rochester all the way up into the Great Lakes and all the way down into Wisconsin. This is called the Niagara Escarpment. And if we go down to the bottom here, you can see again in a little blow up, this is a high cliff, very steep ridge. In most places in the western part of New York State, it's around 300 feet high. We'll cover some of these details again, but just sort of initially, if you look at this area behind to the south of the escarpment is the up part. This area to the north is the low part, sloping down to the Lake Ontario. So this is the Lake Ontario plain. This is also higher than Lake Erie. And you notice, although the Lake Ontario plain has quite a bit of water there for filling and draining sections of the canal, the upper part here, which is much too high, doesn't really have a whole lot of water. Now, south of that, here's another ridge rising up behind it. It was considered to take the canal up here and try to get it down into the lake, or up here and try to get it down into the lake. recognized fairly quickly that just wasn't going to work. However, there was a solution to the problem here. And I'll just hint at that by pointing out that this arrow indicates that this area here tends to slope down slightly toward Lake Erie. This is the Niagara Escarpment. You can see why the canal builders looked up at this and called this the mountain ridge. Very daunting challenge. Here is a portion of the escarpment looking north along the Lake Ontario plain up to Lake Ontario itself. Now, I should point out that the last image, this image, and the next screen are actually not photographs of the escarpment as it is in Niagara County today. I cribbed these images off the website and simply couldn't find any from Niagara County. So this is from just a little bit west of us in the Canadian province of Ontario, but it looks the same. Getting up to the top of this thing, basically going straight up over some very rugged terrain, just really wasn't possible. To go 300 feet straight up with the canal circa 1820 just couldn't be done by anyone. And if we look at, first of all, the Great Lakes system profile, I should point out very quickly, this is not to scale in any direction. But you see here, this is the elevation of Lake Ontario. This is the elevation of Lake Erie. It's more than 300 feet high. Now, they didn't go right along the edge of Lake Ontario, so they were above the lake at the foot of the Niagara Escarpment, but still, they had a huge climb. If we look at the early profile of the original version of the canal, you can see them starting down at the Hudson River, climbing up out of the valley, going into the Mohawk Valley, coming up through that, coming out, across the state, around where we are here now in Syracuse, down into the central part of the state, up again at Rochester, straight across the Lake Ontario plain, up at Lockport, and finally into Lake Erie. This is to scale vertically and horizontally, although they're two different scales. There's something a little misleading about this, though, and I think I should point this out. If the horizontal scale had been correctly observed here, and for that matter, at all the locks, this wouldn't be a little zigzag staircase. This would be a straight line up. This kind of indicates that the locks at Lockport went up over the space of about 5 miles, which would have been quite an engineering feat, but that's not what happened. They go up in a 1/12 of 1 mile. So this would be actually a vertical line straight up. The person drawing the map had to kind of do this to indicate the fact that there were multiple locks. Here's the Niagara Escarpment. Here is where they realized it should be possible to get the canal from down below, and you can see it running along here, up to the top to get it up toward Lake Erie. This is actually a low point coming from the east, coming from the west. The top of the escarpment slopes down to a low point, and moreover, there's an ancient dry gorge here. That's what this notch is. So they realized early on, if they brought the canal around the corner and up into the end of this ancient gorge, which is where the locks are today, here they would only have to get up and down about 70 feet. 70 feet straight up and down, mind you, but this is a lot better than 300 feet. To get to that point, they had to cut through what is now, well, Western New York, Monroe and Orleans and Niagara County. They were going through what would be called old growth forest. And trying to find a picture of an old growth forest just doesn't seem to happen on the web today. This isn't, to my eye, really old growth, but it does give you an idea of the kind of challenges they faced, not just in the Niagara area, but actually going all across New York State, cutting through really uncut forest, very dense, very hard to cut through. This is why the canal took 8 years to build. They had to deal with this kind of stuff. In Niagara County, or actually Orleans and Niagara County, the western end of this whole route below the mountain ridge, they were dealing with timber that had never been cleared. Although humans had been living in and moving through and camping in the Niagara region for probably several thousand years, there really had never been any human habitation immediately below the escarpment. And that's probably for a very good reason. If you notice our scaly little friend down here with the noisemaker on the tail, from the viewpoint of a rattlesnake, the Niagara Escarpment and the terrain immediately below it is very close to paradise. I mean, it's rocky, there are crevices and cracks and crags and caves and springs and streams and lots of rodents. I mean, this is just as close to paradise as a rattlesnake is going to get. From the viewpoint of humans, particularly those who are trying to build a canal through here, this place was infested. There were other places along the canal where, in addition to malaria, rattlesnakes took a toll on the canal workers. They took a horrible toll when they were going through the Niagara region. This was a major problem. Needless to say, once humans moved into the area, those guys are gone. Anyway, here's the escarpment, here's the notch, here's the Ancient Gorge. And if we look at the map showing the completed first version of the canal, here they've brought the canal down the Ancient Gorge to the end, and here are the locks that they use to get up and down to the top. Down here being up, down up here being below the escarpment. Notice they discovered in the course of this an ancient low area, which they called the natural basin. They took advantage of this, as you can see. This was just ideal for docking and loading and unloading and nice wide waters. So, hey, thank you, Mother Nature, after throwing all these curves at us. You can see here what they did to get from down below up to the top of the escarpment at the end of the gorge was to build a staircase or flight of locks. When you go from one lock right to the next chamber, right to the next chamber, that type of a staircase is called a flight, as you probably already know. The idea or the concept of using a flight of locks to get up and down the escarpment was really first put forward in a serious way by David Thomas, one of the Erie Canal engineers, and taken up later on and developed and enlarged and actually built by Nathan Roberts and his team. Here's what they did. This is, as we call it, the Iconic Mural. This is a mural that was commissioned by a bank in Lockport in the 1920s for the 100th anniversary of the opening of the canal. And this shows Lockport actually during the big grand opening celebration in 1825. If we zoom over here to the right, you can see what they did. This is a 5-level flight of locks. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lock chambers here. And it was a double flight. So they could have simultaneous two-way traffic. They could actually keep several boats going up and down simultaneously because they used underground conduits to fill and empty each one of the lock chambers independently. So of course that required a good deal of coordination, but they could actually move a number of boats up and down at the same time. These were huge. The standard Erie Canal lock chamber, when the canal was first finished in the 1820s, was very large for the time period. The standard lock chamber was 90 feet long and 15 feet wide. Most of the locks along the Erie Canal in the 1820s could lift a boat around 8 feet. And this is very respectable for wooden lock gates with iron fittings when you consider the volume of water in a chamber of that size. These could lift 12 feet. These things were massive. Here's a, whoops, whatever that is. Here's a diagram showing the original flight of 5, as it's called, the double flight. This was immensely impressive in the 1820s and 30s, for that matter. Anne Royal, from whom we quoted earlier, looked upon this and said, you know, the only thing that I've ever seen that compares to the masonry work here is the masonry work being built on the new and still coming United States Capitol in Washington. That was her opinion anyway, but it was immensely impressive, quite the feat. This shows the whole completed bit in, this was actually drawn in 1836. So this shows the flight of 5 and Lockport, which sprang up around it. Here's the natural basin. Here's an above ground hydraulic canal taking water out of the top part of the canal and bringing it down, dropping it down so they could turn machinery and water mills. Very soon there was an underground water race, which is still there along the other side of the canal, again, for turning mills and machinery and everything. The one misleading thing about this image, and this was drawn from life, as it says, is under normal circumstances, this whole area down here, and for that matter, the part of the canal up above, would have been clogged with boats. This was immediately busy. The whole canal, as you know, in Syracuse, was busy. This was the main United States highway between the East and the West. I often tell people at the Discovery Center, if you want to think of this as Interstate 1, it really was. Now, here's a zoom in of that drawing. This is quite accurate. I mean, he did this from life. You can see the 1, 2, 3, 4, and up at the top, 5 lock chambers. This, even though this is just a detail, kind of hints at something. The flight of 5 wasn't the only part of the solution at Lockport. And if you look here, you notice here's Lockport up here, but here's the top part of the canal down there. Back to our mural, this shows it a little bit more clearly. They didn't take the locks all the way up to the top of the escarpment. Sometimes when we have a group of students like 4th or 5th graders, we talk about the locks here and say that there were 5 of them. Each one could lift about 12 feet or so. And then you see the wheels going around in at least 1 or 2 heads, and a hand goes waving up, you know, yes. You said that they had to go up and down about 70 feet there. Yes. 5 times 12 is 60. Good for you, kid. Not even a calculator. So if any of our listeners figured that out, you are smarter than a 5th grader. But yes, they didn't go all the way up to the top. Remember, we said earlier, the ground here on top of the escarpment, although this is a low point, the ground here is actually higher than Lake Erie. And moreover, the ground behind it, going into the picture here, tends to slope down just a little bit toward Lake Erie. And there's no water up here. And of course, this, not to mention the upper part of the canal, is going to require a tremendous amount of water to operate. What they did was take the canal up and down about 60 feet with the locks. They cut into the face of the escarpment. This bridge goes over that. And going into the picture, they carved a 7-mile long channel or canyon below ground level. Now, don't laugh at this. This is very crude. We don't have a graphics program, and this is absolutely, positively not to scale in any way, shape, or form. But this would be, if you look at this as sort of a cross section, looking across to the west at Lockport. So this would be the Ancient Gorge coming down from the direction of Lake Ontario. Here's where they would have to climb at the end of the gorge. Here's where they would have to go up and then down and get to the level of Lake Erie. Pardon me for the mouse here. What they did was bring the canal down the Ancient Gorge, build a 5-level staircase of locks, cut into the escarpment. This is not a tunnel. This is actually an open-top canyon. So this is the rock behind it. Built a 7-mile long canyon called the Deep Cut, knowing that when they came out above ground again, when the ground sloped down to meet them, they would there be slightly below the level of Lake Erie. This deep cut is the second half of the project, in addition to the flight of 5. And you can see it on the original map coming around the corner up into the end of the gorge. This is the deep cut coming out above ground where Pendleton, New York is today, joining up with the Tonawanda Creek. Now, if humans hadn't interfered, the normal flow of the Tonawanda Creek is from the east to the west, sloping down to the southwest and emptying into the Niagara River, where the cities of Tonawanda and North Tonawanda are today. When they joined up to the Tonawanda Creek in the 1820s, they actually canalized part of the Tonawanda Creek, one of the very few places where a natural waterway was used on the first version of the canal. What they were able to do, starting here, was reverse the flow and use some of the water not only coming out of the Niagara, well, actually coming out of Lake Erie, but also from this section of the Tonawanda Creek. So let me clarify that. Down here, stop that. The water is coming down the canal from Lake Erie, going through the deep cut and over the edge at the flight of 5 at Lockport. Here, they've diverted water around and up to supplement. Even today, they do this. In the wintertime, when the canal isn't being used, then very often the flow of the Tonawanda Creek is allowed to revert back to what Mother Nature intended. This whole two-part project took almost 3 years. They began work in what is now Lockport in 1823 and actually finished this end about 2 or 3 days before the grand opening in 1825. The deep cut really was considered to be one of the modern marvels of the 1820s. This isn't earth. This is solid bedrock. This isn't a built wall. This is carved through the solid bedrock. There really was nothing like this anywhere else. 7 miles long. You can see why Anne Royal felt that this is like driving or boating through a mountain. Here's what they were dealing with to build this thing or to carve this thing. There are several different layers of rock underneath the Niagara Escarpment. Now, this is the Niagara River Gorge, just a little to the west of us below Niagara Falls. And this shows very clearly the same layers of rock that, of course, they were having to deal with at the escarpment at Lockport. This top layer is the bad boy that they had to deal with. It's called Lockport dolomite. It's actually very similar to limestone, but it has more of the dolomite material in it. And I'm not a geologist, but it's calcium magnesium carbonate. It's hard rock. And they had to cut through this thing basically by hand. You know, there are softer layers underneath, but this is way too deep. They never got down below this layer. And again, you can see here's a picture of the Niagara Gorge. This is the Lockport dolomite. This is what they were dealing with a few miles to the east at Lockport. This is a view of the construction, and you can see some of the things that Anne Royal was talking about. These are the machines, the huge cranes they developed to hoist the huge heavy pieces of rock out. These are the mountains of rock on either side, which apparently were still there along with the machines when she traveled through in 1828. Actually today, even today in Lockport, although a number of the 19th century buildings were destroyed in the 1970s, there are surviving houses and even some churches built from canal stone. That's this stuff. In fact, the Erie Canal Discovery Center is in an 1843 church built from canal stone. These, by the way, you might recognize if you have seen images of seaports or river ports or even farms. Like much of the machinery that was developed for use all along the construction of the Erie Canal, a lot of it was adapted or modified from existing farm equipment or other commercial equipment, and that's certainly the case for these huge horse-drawn cranes. Down here at the end, you just see a little bit of an explosion. This, of course, is long before dynamite. They would have loved to have dynamite. So this is gunpowder. There was a special formulation made by the DuPont company, but it's still black powder, which is not terribly powerful. Very dangerous, but not terribly powerful. One of the other special items that was developed for use on the deep cut was a particular type of Starbit drill. Now, Starbit drills are not a new thing. They weren't invented for use in the deep cut at what became Lockport, but they're percussion drills, and percussion drilling is a very ancient technique where you pound into the rock floor, the rock wall, you pound, 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 turn the drill, pound, 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 turn the drill until you excavate enough of a hole that you can pack it with an explosive charge, in this case, gunpowder, and pay a kid to light the fuse and run fast. Kids are a lot closer to the ground than adults are. The Starbit drills that were used on the deep cut in Lockport were special. A blacksmith named Botsford, nobody seems to know what his first name is, so we just refer to him as Mr. Botsford, developed a way of hardening these iron drills. So these are referred to generally as Botsford drills. We think, this is one in the Niagara County Historical Society's collection, we think this was probably used on the canal. We can't verify that for certain, but it's definitely the type that was used, building the deep cut in particular. Here's a photograph of the deep cut. Since this is a photograph, you can guess this is after the first modernization or enlargement of the canal. This is toward the southwestern end, so this is farther from Lockport and closer to Lake Erie. But even there, where the ground was sloping down, they weren't quite as far below ground level. They were still, as you can see, well below ground level. You can still see some spoils piles up here on the top. They hadn't all been carted away for use in building. And there's something really interesting, I think, on this particular photograph. Here's the towpath, as always, along the canal, just on one side. you notice this wooden platform here. And there's another one a little farther down. And there's another one farther down, et cetera, et cetera. Underneath this platform, you can just barely see it on the photograph, is a hollow area. These still exist down in the deep cut, although they've been filled in. But what these were for was these guys. If a mule should end up in the drink here, now the canal wasn't all that deep, but there's no way, as you can see here, that they could get the mule back up. What they would do would be to lead it along to one of these places, pry the platform out, and I guess there was a step or a ramp underneath here that they could use to get the mule back up onto the towpath again. So I just thought that was kind of cool to show to you. Anyway, here's the view from the top of the locks in Lockport, the first version of the canal, the 1825 version, looking down the natural gorge toward where the canal turns around to the right and heads east toward Albany. So this is looking kind of north or northeast. Again, this would be clogged with boats in a normal day. You can see lots of wharfs and loading and unloading areas and things like that. And you can see also industry springing up along the canal in Lockport. Back to our 1836 view. About the time this was drawn, the state of New York had already long since realized, okay, we built this wonderful, huge, nothing like it in the world, massive canal. And I mean, this is just great. It's very heavily used. We just paid off the whole debt in 10 years. It's not big enough. We need a bigger one now. So starting right after this was drawn, the state began location by location, step by step, enlarging, widening, deepening, modernizing the entire Erie Canal. Lockport's turn came starting in 1839. You can see here they are beginning to excavate just to the side. This would be considered the north side of the canal, although it's west in Lockport. Here's the flight of five. What eventually happened is they built the new up or west set of locks here. These were ripped out and replaced by the new down or eastbound locks. These are all filled in. These are gone. So this is what they ended up with after 1842. This is the enlarged standard Erie Canal lock. This is not at Lockport. This is just the standard size, but you can see all the chambers now are a little bigger. They're 110 feet long. They're 18 feet wide. Make quite a difference, actually. In Lockport, as you can see here, they still returned to the flight of five, same 12-foot lift, same 5 chambers, all now they're just a little bit bigger. And this is a really nice photo because you can see the big balance beams sticking out on either side. By the way, the towpath, along with part of the flight of five, is still there today. More about that in a little bit. And you will notice, if we happen to see that on, if you have sharp eyes, on one of the photographs of some of the restored locks in Lockport, one set of these balance beams actually has a hinge on it. When the first one of these was restored just a few years ago, the state required a hinge so that in case they had to get vehicles up and down here and the lock gates were closed, they could kind of get that out of the way. That, as you can see, wasn't the normal situation in the 19th century. Anyway, no blathering on, we'll continue. These are lock tenders from the late 19th century. And I'm showing you this. These are the people who would open and close the locks and bring the boats through and everything. I'm showing you this because there are still some traces of this to be seen down along the flight of five, and we'll get to that in a moment. You can still see some of the capstans. You can still see traces of these foot plates that they used to walk on when they pushed and pulled on the beams to open and close the lock gates. Hey, stop that. Stop that. All right, there we go. So this is the enlarged 1842 flight of five, still in use at the end of the 19th century. In fact, it was used into the first decade of the 20th century. But of course, by then, the state of New York had realized that now that there were railroads and things like that, the role of the canals, the major waterways, was to carry the big, huge loads of stuff that the railroads just couldn't carry. I mean, there was still a use for the waterways, and still is today. The big barge loads of raw materials, ore and lumber and coal and fuels and grain and machinery. And it doesn't have to be there overnight, but you really need to move a big load at a time. So beginning in the toward the end of the first decade of the 20th century, as you know, in Syracuse, here I am sitting here in this lovely way house that is now suddenly no longer on the canal. The state began modernizing, converting to a barge canal. What they did in Lockport was, first of all, rip this side of the Flight of Five out, as well as excavate all of this over here. So in our next image, you're going to see the kind of bare exposed wall of the central staircase. There we have it. This is where the eastbound or down side of the Flight of Five was before they ripped it all out and then they carved out farther over here. This down here is what they built back up here again along this wall to hold it in place and serve as the one wall of the locks. And I was just noticing yesterday, gee, who says that brutalist architecture is limited to the 1970s? Anyway, this is what they did, and this should look very familiar to you from any of the 20th century locks along the Erie Canal. Here's kind of neat. Here they are enlarging the deep cut above the locks, going through the escarpment, and now they have a channeling machine. They don't have to do it by hand anymore. So this is helpful. Will you please stop it? What are you doing? Anyway, all right. This is what you see today. Here's the Flight of Five. This side was ripped out and filled in. They have buildings sitting on top of it now. Here are the 20th century barge canal locks. These are the ones they still use. Here are the central steps. These are still there. You can still go up and down them. You can go across and up and down through wherever they don't have blocked off. 5 chambers, one side of the Flight of Five, are still there. They were kept in the early 20th century just for use as a spillway. But beginning a few years ago, actually, 3 of these have been restored now. We're doing that one at a time. So if you go down to the locks today, what is this doing? All right, if you go down to the locks today, you can see that a few years ago, they started restoring them one at a time. And if you look at this picture, you really get an idea of the scale of these things. By modern standards, any of the 19th century Erie Canal locks are puny, but they're big nonetheless. Lock gates have been restored and put into 3 of the chambers now, so there are 3 sets. Here's that hinge I was talking about. This wouldn't normally be on the balance beam. And now that they have those, what they're doing is demonstrating them in the summertime on Saturdays. This is the very first day that the very first set was demonstrated. Obviously, this is before COVID, but this is where all the people were around watching and taking pictures. They have volunteers pushing and pulling now on Saturdays in the summertime. They have also installed a Durham boat. This is, as you know, not a full-size canal boat, but this type of boat was used all over North America in the 1840s, which is appropriate to the time period here, rivers and canals, including the Erie Canal. This was built by volunteers at the Buffalo Maritime Center. So they're using that to help visitors understand why the water is going up and down and how the boats were pulled through. Of course, the canal is still operating, so the 20th century locks are the ones that they still use. And again, there's a flight here, only now it's just 2 instead of 5. You have this here at the Erie Canal Museum in Syracuse. The Ticket to Ride 4th grade program sponsored by the Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor. These are a bunch of 4th graders standing there just waiting for the boat to pass underneath. And you know what some of the boys are going to be doing, which is why we can't actually have the 4th graders on here when the boat's going underneath. But anyway, we won't talk about that. The canal in Lockport is still in use, of course, and has also been developed as a visitor attraction. There are things to do in addition to seeing and touring through the locks themselves. There's a cruise boat that starts in the Ancient Gorge and goes up through both sets of locks and up into the upper canal and back down again, about a 2-hour narrated cruise. That underground hydraulic race that I mentioned is called the Lockport Cave, and they do tours through that as well. And of course, adjacent to the canal and the locks, right across the parking lot, we have the Erie Canal Discovery Center, operated by the Niagara County Historical Society. This is a church built from canal stone, as I mentioned, from 1843. And upstairs, of course, we have the, quote, iconic mural, unquote. We also have interactive exhibits. We have as you do here, we have the Lockport Visitor Center, so we can give people information about the canal and the locks and things to see and do in the area. It really functions as an interpretive center for the locks and the Erie Canal. So, with a final look at the locks at Lockport as they are today, I'll just remind you there is a tour that you can follow around. We can give you a little brochure that you can go down into the locks area, up and down, across, around, every place that they don't have blocked off on any particular day for construction or repair or something. You can go through all kinds of historical traces down there with signboards and labels. So this is definitely, if you get to Lockport, definitely worth a visit. If you do get to Lockport, we hope you can come just across the parking lot up at the top there and visit us at the Discovery Center. We can give you some more information. We can help you on your way. And of course, we also have the restrooms and the museum shop. With that little tacky note, we'll end and turn this back over to the Erie Canal Museum in Syracuse. Natalie? Somebody? Anyone? I'm hoping we can take questions.
Yes, I am going to change it now so that participants can unmute themselves. And if you have a question, you're welcome to unmute yourself and come ask Ray a question.
Yeah. I think you'll probably just have to speak because I can't really see anybody waving their hand. So go ahead.
Okay, you're also welcome to turn video on if you want or speak. And I will also go and check Facebook and see if anybody has any questions there. Lawrence on Facebook has asked, what were the fees of the locks?
Well, I don't really have a good answer to that because it, of course, changed over time. It was never terribly expensive, as you know. To use the canal was a lot cheaper than any other source. So I don't really have a good answer to that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I feel like that's our answer to a lot of questions is
I don't know.
That's a really good question. If only those records existed. Let's see, we have another question. Oh, where did it go? From Bill, who has asked if you can talk at all about the laborers.
Yeah, that's a good point. Most of the Erie Canal, as it was being constructed across New York State, was actually dug by local people. Villagers, the farmers, they would basically just go to them and say, you know, something to the effect of, who would like some extra money? Oh, great, here's your shovel. You know, the answer from the farmer might be, well, you know, I have to get in the harvest, but you can rent my wife. You hear a lot about the Irish laborers. There were Irish in North America. They weren't being imported to work on the Erie Canal. This is not like the railroads out in the West later in the century, bringing in Chinese laborers and what today we might refer to as human trafficking. But there were a lot of Irish bopping around North America, both the new United States and also the British colonies up north of us. And many of them were looking for work, and here was work. In some cases, they started in on this and followed the construction of the canal along. And here's 8 years worth of work, and it paid pretty well. You know, we do know that for a skilled laborer, it's often said $1 a day, 50 cents a day, but that was good pay back then. So, you know, this was good work. A lot of Irish did work on the canal in addition to local people. At what became Lockport, there were no local people. Before it was announced that the canal was going to be put through there, there wasn't even a farm there. You know, as we saw, it was still old growth forest in many cases. As soon as it was announced that the canal was going through there, the first people on the scene were, of course, the land speculators, followed by some settlers and people moving in to work on the canal or people moving in to deal with the people working on the canal. So most of those were what you would, I suppose, call Anglo-German, American, Scottish, German, American settlers or former settlers or newly born Americans of Anglo-German, Scottish heritage. However, the Six Nations people who were at that point settled in Niagara County, not right at Lockport, but just a little to the west, had now a good many decades of experience in dealing with the white settlers. And the Tuscaroras, Scarore, were telling us a couple of years ago when the Tuscarora School was visiting the Erie Canal Discovery Center, we saw when people came in, we knew what they were going to do. They told us they were starting to work on this thing. And as soon as the work started, all of a sudden, all these other people showed up. And we didn't know who they were, but they were very strange. They looked different. They dressed differently. They spoke a completely unintelligible language. And nobody told us who they were, but all they did was dig and dig and dig and dig. So we called them Renukgat, the groundhogs. And of course, those were the Irish. So there were a lot of Irish working at Lockport. And this was a 3-year project. So this was a lot of pretty much steady work for the laborers. I don't know if that fully answers your question, but you do hear a lot about the Irish laborers on the canal, and in Lockport, even today, you find a lot of Irish names on buildings and streets, and not to mention in local businesses and governments and everything else.
Lawrence mentioned that at one time the Irish could not find any work.
Well, they found it here.
They did. They found it eventually. One other comment from Jerry, who has said you didn't mention the tech display in the building at the bottom of the lock.
Well, if you look on the picture that we just happened to be looking at, that little white building down at the very bottom in the 19-teens, when the final version of the canal was first finished, was the powerhouse. That was a little hydroelectric generating station that generated the power to operate the 20th century locks. If I can get my little cursor back here. These are still electrically operated today, although now through a kind of a convoluted system, they're hooked up to the grid. So for many years, up until fairly recently, the lock tenders had just some photographs and some old cases and things down in there, and called it the Erie Canal Museum. They can't be expected to have a museum down there, but the group, the Lockport Locks Heritage District Corporation, that has been the nonprofit group that has been working to restore the lock chambers, also got a grant to put in a very nice exhibit down at the foot of the locks. Initially, it was to be about the 20th century locks, and it kind of ended up being sort of an exhibit with materials from both the 19th and 20th century. I didn't mention that right at the moment because this year, because of the virus and short staffing, the Canal Corporation wasn't able to have that open. They can only have that open when they can have somebody to keep an eye on it. And this year in particular, they really had no way of enforcing limits on number of people going through or social distance. So I didn't mention that, but hopefully in the future, this will be open again. And it's a very nice exhibit down at the foot of the locks about the locks.
Someday when things are normal yet again.
Whatever normal is.
Whatever
yes.
normal means. Exactly. I will say, back when it was called the Erie Canal Museum, every now and again it would present small difficulties for us because it would show up on the map at the bottom of our webpage that shows the Erie Canal Museum. It seems that pings geographically to people. So if they were closer to Lockport than here, then that museum would show up.
Yes, well, we have the same experience. We are at the request of people, including the people who are doing the locks restoration, serving the public as the visitor center and the interpretive center. So there's a great deal of confusion when this display is now referred to as the Erie Canal Museum. And this year in particular, we've noticed that a lot of people come to us and say, well, the internet says you're closed. No, it doesn't. I mean, our website says that we're open, blah, blah, blah. No, the internet says the Erie Canal Museum is closed. Oh boy, well, what are you going to do?
Yep, I can only imagine. Yeah, it is. I've tried to explain to people that it's difficult when you have one single entity that's 363 miles long. Yes. There's bound to be things that use the same name across that territory.
Indeed, yes.
And we all tell a different part of the story, and you must visit us all in order to learn it all.
To get the picture, yes, you really should. We do actually have the materials that the Erie Canalway National Heritage Quarter provides on the canal and its history. And there's a very nice brochure that's impossible to refold, but it's a directory of all of the museums and sites along the canal. And anytime we know that somebody is going eastbound, shove that into their hands and say, oh, look, I can go all along the canal and see all these things. And by the way, when you get to Syracuse.
Yes, that's right. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much again, Ray. I don't see any more questions. So thank you all who joined us on Facebook. We had a pretty good crowd. We had a pretty good crowd the whole time, which is really wonderful. And thank you again to those of you who joined us on Zoom, who gave us that small donation and were able to join us right here live on Zoom. And we look forward to seeing you all again next time, perhaps at one of our upcoming events. And if not, maybe at our next digital program, which we'll make you all aware of. Thanks, everyone.